Okay, so on the fly here, I'm changing my mind about how I want this last part to be organized. So we talked about all the things that people are doing not so well. And I think that we kind of peppered in some of the some possible solutions, right? Kind of in amongst there, or why those problems exist in the first place, right? Let's talk about a way of sort of quantifying um, the impact that humans have. Okay, so I'm going in a little bit out of order from the PowerPoint, but I think you'll be all right. So we're talking about something called ecological footprint. This graph is not from your book, but I really like this graph because I think it's easiest to understand sort of the two components that determine, what makes a good versus bad ecological footprint. Okay, so this graph is a little tricky to read. All right, and so this might be another thing that's worth talking about in Zoom, just to kind of make sure that you're really clear and understand this. So what we're looking at here on this axis, on the x-axis, we're looking at available ecological capacity. In the units are hectares per person. So the idea is basically how many resources are there per person, right? Now, this is separated out by country, right? And they obviously haven't included all of them. They've just included a handful, right? But we've got a handful of countries here that we're looking at. And then also that little square represents the whole world altogether, okay? So on this axis, going from left to right, yeah, so 0 is very little resources available per person. 16 is a lot of resources available per person, right? And so there's a variety of reasons for that. One is the size of a population of any given country, right? So there's not as many people that live in New Zealand as there are in India, right? Just it's smaller, okay? But also what type of habitat is located in those areas. So is the environment of, these particular areas, does it have a lot of resources? Are we talking about, rich, lush forests? Or are we talking about deserts, which don't have as much, biocapacity essentially, okay? Are we talking about once again, rainforests that are very like lush, right, and productive? Or are we talking about places that are not so much, okay? So that's what the bottom axis is, all right? The y-axis is ecological footprint. So what that means is basically the amount of resources that are used per person. And so once again, the unit that they're using is hectares, which is a unit of area. So essentially what this one is saying is the x-axis is about how many resources are available. The y-axis is about how many resources are being used per person, so per capita. Okay. The red line across here, that red line, represents when the two are even. So if a particular country or the world or whoever, right, if it was perfectly even, so that the amount of ecological capacity that was available was the amount being used, it would be right on that red line. Okay, so that's what the red line is about. All right, so now let's talk about what it means to be on either side of the red line. Okay, so if I asked you the question, if I said, well, of the countries that are in this diagram, which one has the highest ecological footprint, right? So remember, that's over here. Who has the highest ecological footprint? Well, according to this, it's New Zealand, coming in at 10. Yeah? Okay. And yet, New Zealand is shown in a blue dot because it's on the bottom side of the red line. Because even though in New Zealand their ecological footprint is 10, their ecological capacity is 14. So they aren't using as many resources as they have. right? So even though their ecological footprint is kind of high, right, they still have more resources than they need. So their overall impact is not as big of a deal. Does that make sense? So all of these blue dots represent different places that, at least at the time that this graph was produced, are on the right side of the red line, right? They use fewer resources than they have. All of the black dots represent places where they use more resources than they have, right? So here's us. Yeah. So we have a smaller ecological footprint than people in New Zealand do, but also we have a lot less ecological capacity. So we're on the quote wrong side of the line. Okay. All right. So who has the biggest difference, right? So of the black dots here, right, the US is the highest, right? Which means we're ignoring New Zealand for now because they're on the other side of the red line. But right, the US has a higher ecological footprint than all the other black dots. Okay. But it's not the one that's farthest away from the red line. The one that's farthest away from the red line is actually Japan, right? So even though the typical ecological footprint of a person in Japan is much lower than the US, Japan is a teeny tiny country that doesn't have very many resources at all. So they are really far away from the red line. Now, does it really matter how far away you are from the red line? Not really, because if you think about it this way, we're connected, right? We can get resources from wherever, right? In fact, I'm willing to bet you my next paycheck that you have interacted with something, whether it's your clothing or a product or your food, right? You have interacted with stuff from, I'm going to say, at least 5 different countries. And that's really lowballing it. It's probably much higher than that, right? Because we have a global economy now. Yeah. So does it really matter what individual countries do? Not really. What matters is the overall, right? And so the whole world is on the wrong side of the red line. Okay. And so there's a lot of ways of looking at that, right? There's a lot of ways of looking at sort of, what's everybody's fair share. Yeah. And so if they're using these beautiful footprints of different sizes to kind of help visualize amount of resource use, right? So the US average ecological footprint is 7.2, right? Worldwide is 2.7. The amount that the world needs to be in order for us to be sustainable, right, to not use more than we have, is 1.8, right? By comparison, they've chosen in this example to show Bangladesh. So they're at 0.7. Yeah. Okay, so this is an important issue, right? And so here's a bunch of different places that, kind of show, what this looks like. A lot of times you'll see a relationship between industrialization, right? How industrialized a country is determines how many resources they're using, right? This is an image that I saw that was really, really impactful to me. And so what they did is they asked 2 families in different parts of the world. So, Western, and then this is Asian, right? Area. Okay, I don't remember the exact countries, right? This could be India or Pakistan, perhaps. This is somebody from Europe or probably the US, I'm guessing based on the appliances, right? And this is quite old because look at their computer. Totally old, right? And so what they did is they asked these people to bring all of their belongings outside of their house and put them on display in front of the house, right? And see how incredibly different that is, right? As far as just the amount of stuff, right? So, it's just an incredible difference between a really, really minimal footprint and a really, really, kind of oversized footprint. Okay. Whenever I talk about this stuff, I always feel like people are going to feel like I'm trying to guilt us all, right? For, shame on us for wanting to have nice things. Right. So it's about balance, and it's about making good choices, right? And it's about finding areas where you are more comfortable with cutting than others, right? So you're going to be doing an assignment this week where you look at your ecological footprint and think about things that you could do, to help reduce yours. Okay. So anyway, so here's kind of a map worldwide. Here's another map. The reason I like this other map is the countries that are using the most resources get bloated in size compared to the ones that are using not as many resources, at least not as many based on their availability, right? So that's kind of cool, right? So the reason that New Zealand and Australia are shown in red is they still have a really high ecological footprint, right? They use individual, right, per capita, each person uses a lot of resources, but they have a lot of resources, so they're kind of shrinking. Whereas North America is all bloaty, and right, specific, not so much Mexico, but US and Canada. Okay, it's bloaty because we have a high ecological footprint and we don't have enough resources to meet those needs. Yeah. Okay, so that's ecological footprint. All right, so it's kind of an interesting idea, something to think about, a way of sort of quantifying your impact. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about, and I don't want to spend a ton of time getting into this because it's we could go on and on forever, and I just don't want to. Okay, conservation. So aside from thinking about our resource use, thinking about where we're getting things from, thinking about the stuff that you guys already know, you're supposed to recycle. Right? You might even know that recycling, we have made way more recyclables than capacity to recycle, right? So unfortunately, a lot of things that are theoretically recyclable end up in landfills because nobody wants them, right? We used to send a lot more recyclables overseas to be used in other places, and now there's not as much demand for that. So even things that you throw in the recycle bin often end up in a landfill. So other than the things that you already know about, right, and things that you're going to learn about in your ecological footprint in that activity, there's other things that we can do that maybe you don't know about, right? So yes, stop polluting. That's a good start. Right? But what are some other things that maybe you haven't heard of to help conserve? So the first thing I want to talk about for an issue of conservation is I want to talk about whether or not, what should our focus be? Should our focus be on preserving species or preserving habitats? Okay. And this is a really interesting conversation. That orangutan, by the way, she looks mad. I can't tell if it's male or female. I can't see enough of the face. The males have these big like cheek pads. So I think that's mama. I think that's mama with her kiddo. She mad. She's mean mugging you. She's got the RBF situation happening. Anyway. So should we preserve species or should we preserve habitats? Well, I'm hoping that by now, based on what you've learned about food webs and all of that, that you would say, well, yeah, we should totally preserve habitats. Because what does it matter if we save one species if, the rest of their habitat is, comes unglued and falls apart, right? That's useless. Why would we do that? So I hope you see that. But I will sort of play the devil's advocate that sometimes species preservation actually does more good. Okay. So if someone says to you, save the, Sumatran rainforest, you might really care. You might not. Right? But if you look at a picture of an orangutan, you might be like, oh my gosh, those are some majestic creatures, and I think that we need to save them. Right? They're very compelling. A lot of species of particularly animals, because we are animals, so we tend to identify with animals better, are extraordinarily compelling, right? Things that are cute or amazing, right? So like pandas are a perfect example, right? Everybody loves pandas, everybody, because they look all cute. They look like teddy bears, and they're all cute and black and white and fuzzy, and they do silly things, and you know, they're just goofy little animals, right? And so they make a good like poster child, right, for protecting forested areas of China. That's where they live, right? So we can use species as a way of protecting habitats, right? Get people invested in protecting a species so that then we protect the habitat for them. Yeah. So this is one of the areas where zoos and aquaria are especially useful, right? Is when the public gets to actually see the twinkle in the eye of an elephant, right? They're much more likely to care about protecting elephants, protecting the habitat of elephants, than they are if they never see that, right? And so, so leveraging access to get to know creatures, to get to care about them, is a pretty useful tool. Okay. So anyway, so two approaches: preserve species versus preserving habitats. They can be used hand in hand. They can be used together, right? And that's what I'm all about, right? So when you adopt your penguin, just somebody gives you a Christmas gift instead of an actual present, they adopt a penguin from the zoo for you, right? So, oh, they give you a cute little penguin plushie, and that makes you feel all warm and cuddly, and penguins are cute and silly, and aren't they adorable, right? But if that's actually money being spent to help to preserve the habitat, good. Yeah. Anyway, okay. There are other things that we can do that actually are small changes that we can make that make a really big impact for life. Okay. So one of those is wildlife corridors. Okay. So I'm going to, rather than show you this stupid picture, I'm going to show you, it's not in this lecture. It's in a different one. Okay. I'm not going to show it to you. Wildlife corridors are when you produce, you basically make connections between patches of nature to allow organisms to move back and forth, right? So this is really, really useful, particularly for predators that have huge range, or for animals that need to migrate, right? So make safe spaces for animals to cross traffic, for example, right? So the example I always think about is, a very Southern California example, which is the freeway, right? So, if a mountain lion tries to cross the freeway to get to another part of its territory, that's not going to be good for the mountain lion, right? But if you build a bridge over the freeway where the mountain lion can go, right? It's safer for the mountain lion because it can get to the other side of its habitat, and it's safer for the drivers so they don't have to, hit a mountain lion, right? Wildlife corridors are a fantastic idea. Yeah. And so sometimes they're like bridges that are specifically for wildlife. Sometimes they're like tunnels. You have tunnels that go underneath something, underneath the freeway as opposed to over the freeway. Yeah. Okay. We can also protect natural spaces by having buffer zones, right? So here we're going to set aside this place that we're going to preserve. We're going to care for it. But you also have to have a buffer zone, which allows humans to enjoy nature to an extent without causing too much damage in the actual preserve itself. Yeah. Okay. So some other ideas. All right. We also need to be very thoughtful about what types of habitats we protect. And so one important thing to think about is to think about which habitats are most diverse and most rare. And there's a lot of overlap between those two, right? So one of the reasons that people get so worked up about tropical rainforests, there's two main reasons. One is tremendous productivity, right? Tremendous diversity of life, right? and also tons and tons of plants that are doing a lot of photosynthesis, right? And a lot of the species that are there are unique. Yeah, so really, really, really unique habitat, okay? Coral reefs are an example of an aquatic environment that is very unique and very diverse and very productive, right? Islands are often, biodiversity hotspots because they're separated, particularly when we have large islands that are separated from the mainland by a sizable distance, like Madagascar or New Zealand, right? Or any of the, chains of islands in, Southeast Asia, right? They tend to have really cool, unique organisms that don't exist anywhere else, right? Because they're separate from other places. One of the things, though, that I bet you weren't expecting is that another major biodiversity hotspot is actually a biome called the chaparral. Guess where you live, folks? Assuming you're, here, more or less, this Rancho Cucamonga area, right? You live in the chaparral. You live in an area that is a biodiversity hotspot. There is way more diversity in plants and animals here than there are in a lot of other places in the country, right? So if you look at this map over here of the US, right, where are the biodiversity hotspots? Here. And then, Florida. Everywhere else is boring and lame. Okay. So with all of that said, because we have such unique habitat that's found in very few places worldwide, right? The only other places that have chaparral is there's a little bit of it kind of here. There's a little bit of it down here and, here and here, right? Because chaparral is so rare, and I would argue because most people give a lot of attention to rainforest, right? This is all rainforest, right? That's rainforest too. Everybody knows about rainforests, right? But not a lot of people, even people who live in the chaparral, know about chaparral, okay? So there's our rainforest and our chaparral, right? You are here. Okay, just another image of the same thing. So with that said, one of the other projects you guys are going to be working on this week is you are going to be producing what I call a biome postcard. And so what you're going to do, I'm not going to go into the instructions here because you can read that somewhere else on Canvas. But what I will say about it is I am not going to teach, I'm not going to do a lecture on biomes. What I am going to expect you to do is to read about in your book and learn from each other from your biome postcards. You're going to learn about all of the different terrestrial biomes. We're not going to worry about marine or, aquatic. We're not going to worry about all the aquatic biomes because that's just too many, right? But you're going to learn about terrestrial biomes. You did this at some point, right? I have vivid memories of learning about this in 7th grade. Okay, so I'm sure you've learned about this before, okay? But we're going to learn about this. We're going to learn about what are the qualities of that habitat, what are the unique things about it, what is the climate like in the different biomes, what kinds of organisms live in those biomes, right? And just like fun facts about those biomes, okay? So you're going to be learning about that on your own and with each other, okay? All right. That's it as my wrap up for conservation, okay? All right, ecology's done. Let's see what we get into next.